Welcome back all across the fruited plains of America. Optimism is in the air, hope is in the air, but then chaos is coming in from California. I knew it was going to happen. There'd be some kind of an incident, some kind of a this is MAGA country incident, a Jesse Smollett moment. And it certainly is good. The news cycle is having its piranha-like feeding frenzy off of this, trying to offset the narrative of the disastrous reset that is coming to America because of the conservative backlash against the Biden regime and their doomed policies. But listen to me, folks. All of this economic chaos that we're in, my concern is it's going to get worse. They're going to try to blame the Republicans for it. When the Republicans go in, you just watch. They're already saying it. Oh, look at what they're going to lie. So you've got to really do an analysis of where you're at. If you're in debt, you need to get out of debt. If you've got some money, you need to know exactly where to go to protect it. Mercedes Sparks, we've been working on something with my cousin Billy, who is the multimillionaire mentor, who I love. Tell me what we're doing.
Yeah, so what we're doing real special, you guys see Billy on Fridays. We've got Chad Franson on. We've got Karen Conrad. And we want to bring to you these financial experts that are going to tell you exactly what you need to do to survive the financial storm that's coming. Because like what Lance was just talking about, all these projections, you got Jamie Dimon coming out, you got Jeff Bezos, we got major CEOs coming out saying next year we're going to be in a recession. Well, newsflash, we really are already in a recession and it's going to get worse. We got the 10-year bond yield inverted for the first time, and that has always been a historic indicator of a recession that's coming. And so what my heart is, what Lance's heart is we want to help you guys prepare. And so that's why we went to Billy, we went to Chad, and we said, please give us a resource. Give us something that we can give to our people that's going to show them exactly what they need to do, no matter where you are. So if you're in debt and you're thinking, well, what am I going to do? I'm living paycheck to paycheck. What should I be thinking about? If you have money and you're thinking, oh my gosh, how do I protect what little nut that I've squirreled away? How do I protect that when inflation's going up and the value of my dollar is going down? What should I be looking at that I should be investing in? And then also, too, you've got people who have money to invest. You're thinking about legacy. So listen, go to lancewallnau.com/stormproof. And we've got a financial stormproof guide that Billy and Chad and Karen have put together for you guys, and is your step-by-step plan for how you're going to weather the coming economic storm. So prepare, invest in yourself, and take action right now. lancewallnau.com/stormproof.
And Wallnau spelled Wallnau. I can't help it. It's German, it's French, it's who knows what. No one Jewish I know has that name, but I'm telling you, lancewallnau.com/stormproof. This is what you got to do to do an analysis of where you're at and how to protect yourself. Now let's get into my favorite program, the one that we're doing right now. I'm excited today about our guest, Bill Federer, who has been, even on my staff, I had them coming in from around the corner saying, I've been listening to Bill's American Minute, and it was Adventures in Odyssey or something like that. They grew up with Focus on the Family, and your 1 minute history, Bill, has changed their lives. But you have a distinguished resume, but it doesn't really matter what the resume is. What matters is people get a taste and see of you right now, and they'll realize why I'm excited to have you on, because you've got something to say, and I'd say that your whole life has been a preparation for this moment, because you've been writing and speaking and warning about processes, principles, philosophies shaping American government or history. But now it's really coming to the point where people are actually saying, wow, is that true? And they're coming to you, I'm sure, from every direction to give clarification and understanding to what's going on in America.
Well, it is. And I like to look back to try to get a trajectory of where we're headed in the future. So I tell people history is not prophetic, but it is predictive. So past behavior is the best indicator of future performance. You add that together with a little prophetic, and you get an idea pretty close to where things are headed. And so I look back, and there are two waves of pastors that helped influence the founding of America. And we need to understand these two waves because they are still at play today. And if you like, I can go into that.
Yeah, please do, because I just got done talking to William Cook, great guy who in 2012 started the Black Robe Regiment because he listened to people like you, David Barton, talking about a clergy in America's history. And he said, I didn't know about the Black Robe Regiment, which was, of course, what the British called the clergy in America and the people that they enlisted. But he's now mobilizing these, and they're in 26 states already, just getting pastors to sign pledges that they'll teach once a year about citizen engagement in elections and biblical values and such. So I think there's a resurgence. I think a lot of pastors are rediscovering maybe that they have a bigger role in this than just avoiding the politics. Maybe they need to be involved with clarifying issues and mobilizing people in their communities. So take it away and tell us, what are you teaching right now that's helping pastors get clarity?
Right. So the two waves that came into America are the Calvinist Puritan wave of the 1600s and then the Lutheran pietist wave of the 1700s. And so let's unpack them. So the most common form of government in world history is kings. Nimrod, Pharaoh, Caesar, Kaiser, Sultan, Tsar. And as the centuries go on, the kingdoms get bigger. Because with military advancements, kings can kill more people. So instead of king killing people with a rock, they can kill with a bronze weapon or an iron weapon or a failing spear or a scimitar sword or gunpowder. The weapon improves, but it's that same fallen nature of king, kill, and able. And with technological advancements, kings can track more people. I mean, Augustus Caesar wanted to have a worldwide tracking system. It was called the census. If he could have had 5G and cell phones and cameras, he would have used that, right? And so they keep going on until finally the King of England has the biggest empire that planet Earth had ever seen. The King of England was a globalist. He was a one world government guy with him at the top. India, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, British Guyana, Canada, Barbados, Bermuda, Jamaica, Canada, and America. 13 million square miles. They have 1 billion people. About a fifth of the world population is under their control. And so wherever there's a king, it's a hierarchical system. If you are friends with the king, you're more equal. You're not friends with the king, you're less equal. And if you're an enemy of the king, you're dead. It's called treason, or you're a slave. People say, I thought slavery started in 1619. No, wherever you had the first king on top, you had slaves on the bottom. And these kings claim to be divinely appointed, right? It's called the divine right of kings. And a king is, in a sense, a glorified gang leader. Every now and then you get a good king. He wants to centralize more power so he can do good more efficiently, but he doesn't live forever. And at some point, all that concentrated power is handed over to some lousy son or grandson that gets oppressive. The Bible example, Joseph in Egypt, godly man, concentrates power into the hands of the Pharaoh. And what did that Pharaoh do? Well, that particular Pharaoh fed the children of Israel, gave them the best land of Goshen, gave them jobs taking care of his cattle. But then there was a new Pharaoh that did not know Joseph. He used all that concentrated power to oppress the children of Israel, make them slaves, and even throw their sons in the Nile River. So that's the dilemma. We get our guy in there and we let him fudge and take a little more power than he should, but then it's all handed over to the other party and they use that oppressively. And so the king is the most common form of government. And the idea of people ruling themselves without a king, where did that idea come from? It had to come from somewhere. Well, it really came from the Calvinist Puritans. And this is a century before Europe's Age of Enlightenment. And the Calvinist Puritans got their idea from the Bible. What part of the Bible? That first 400 years out of Egypt before King Saul. So this is about 1400 BC. They come out of Egypt, and for 400 years, there's no king. And this is the first time in world history where you have a nation with millions of people and no king. And it works because every citizen is taught the law, and they're personally accountable to God to follow the law. And this period of time is called the Hebrew Republic. And the Calvinist Puritan scholars were actually called Christian Hebraists. James Harrington, another was John Sadler, whose sister Ann Sadler married John Harvard. And that's why they taught Hebrew at Yale and Harvard. They were fascinated with this republic, how you can have a government without a king. And so you look at this, I mean, the King of England looked to the Bible as his source of authority, but he looked to the King Saul and on period of the Bible. And the Calvinist Puritans looked to the pre-King Saul period, where you had a nation with millions of people and no king, and it worked because every single citizen was taught the law and personally accountable to God to follow the law. So this is what the Calvinist Puritans understood, and it was brought to America by these pastors, by the Pilgrims and Puritans. So kings have subjects who are subjected to the king's will. Democracies and republics have citizens. The word citizen is Greek. It means co-king, co-ruler, co-sovereign. And so if you think of all government on a line, one side is total government, the other side's no government. Total government, you have a king, he rules through fear. The no government side would be anarchy, unless the citizens are taught the law, and what motivates them to follow the law is they're accountable to God, who's watching everyone, wants them to be fair, he's going to hold them accountable in the future. So when we say it's one nation under God, it's more than just a nice little tip of the hat. It's the awareness that this God exists and he's watching us and going to hold us accountable that motivates everybody to have virtue and morals, and you can have order with no police. So that said, this is called a covenant form of government where you, all the individuals, get rights and blessings from God. And then they voluntarily take care of their neighbor and they're fair to their neighbor because they're accountable to God. It's like a triangle, rights from God, take care of your neighbor because you're accountable to God. Now, this is different than socialism. Socialism, the state is God. You get rights from the state, you're accountable to the state. And if the state doesn't like you, the state can kill you. And now Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister. And in 1996, she said, your founding fathers look after one another, not only as a matter of necessity, but as a matter of duty to their God. So this covenant form of government. John Winthrop was a Puritan founder of Massachusetts. John Winthrop said, this love among Christians is a real thing, that we must make one another's condition our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together. We shall find that the God of Israel is among us. So these Puritans were looking back to Israel as covenant form of government. You're taking care of your neighbor voluntarily. It's not socialism where the government takes your stuff and redistributes it. And now these Calvinist Puritans came to America in the 1600s. And it was a big deal coming up with a form of government without a king. For those not familiar, the King of England demanded that everybody be Anglican. He actually passed the Act of Uniformity of Common Prayer. What's that? You do not make up prayers because you could make up one that's wrong. So the government wrote all the prayers down and put them in a book, the Book of Common Prayer. You just open it to the right page and read the prayer. And if you're caught with a small group and you're making up your own prayers, the FBI will raid your house, handcuff you, drag you away, bring you before the Star Chamber. It was this government building, sort of like a January 6th hearing. And they'll make you confess to something you didn't do and brand you on the face as a heretic and cut off your nose and then stick you in a room where they detain you indefinitely for years and you rot away, right? And they don't even feed you in the British prison. You have to have some friend that misses you and brings you food. And somebody that was captured during this time was John Bunyan. At a Bible study, too many people, the government says, oh, you could be planning an insurrection. He spent 12 years in prison, and that's when he wrote Pilgrim's Progress, that famous novel. And so one of the separatist groups fled to Holland and then fled to America. We call them the Pilgrims. They were going to go to Jamestown and submit to the king's government. They get blown off course, land in Massachusetts. It's too stormy. The captain says, everyone off the boat. And this little church group, these pilgrims, say, well, we got a question. Who is going to be in charge of us? We were going to go to Jamestown and submit to the king's government. There's no king-appointed person in our little group. Who's going to be in charge? They do something unique. They grant themselves the authority to start a government. It's called the Mayflower Compact. It says we, in the presence of God, covenant ourselves into a civil body politic. So let's backtrack. This is a church group forming itself into a civil body politic. I'll say that one more time. This is a church group forming itself into a civil body politic. Now, why? They continue to enact just and equal laws as shall be thought most meet or necessary, and to which we promise all due submission. Simple, revolutionary. It was a polarity change in the flow of power. Instead of top-down rule by kings, it's bottom-up rule by we. It's the difference between a dead pyramid rule top-down and a living tree where every root and every little capillary root sucks in nutrients to keep it alive, right? It's a bottom-up form of government. Difference between divine right of kings, you do what I tell you or I'll kill you, or we the people. So you had these first pilgrims, and then 1630, you had these Puritans, they flood into Massachusetts, and you have pastors in their churches founding communities. So you have a pastor, John Lothrop, in his church found Barnstable, Massachusetts. A pastor, Roger Williams, in his church found Providence, Rhode Island, and the First Baptist Church in America. A pastor, John Wheelwright, in his church found Exeter, New Hampshire, and a pastor, Thomas Hooker, in his church found Hartford, Connecticut. This is
wait. Now, Bill, I'm loving this, but I'm having various levels of response here because one, first, I love drinking from a fire hose when it's saying something I didn't know. Wow, all powerful stuff. But now I got to stop. You're telling me not only was Jamestown an unintentional exercising Christian self-government that became foundational to our culture, but that the pastors played a key role in the founding of the various colony entities that became states? Is that true?
Yeah. So you had Virginia, which was a king-run colony, Jamestown, and then you had New England. And New England was founded by these Calvinist Puritans. And so you had pastors in their churches founding towns, founding cities, coming up with the laws for the cities. Roger Williams, he and his church founded Providence, Rhode Island, and the first Baptist church in America. Reverend Thomas Hooker and his church founded Hartford, Connecticut. Let's look at him for a minute. So the Thomas Hooker, the Puritans said only Puritans could vote. Thomas Hooker said anyone that's a Christian should be allowed to vote. So he leaves Boston and he founds Hartford. And after he's there, the church members come to him and say, Pastor, can you preach a sermon on how we're supposed to set up our government? And so he gives a sermon in 1638, titled The Foundation of Authority is Laid in the Free Consent of the People. This is reflected in our declaration, government from the consent of the governed. And this is different from Europe, where the foundation of authority is the divine right of kings. And his sermon goes on, the privilege of election belongs to the people. This is reflected in our Constitution, we the people. And so his sermon is written down. It's called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. And it's the Constitution of Connecticut from 1639 up until 1818. Connecticut is using Pastor Thomas Hooker's sermon as their constitution. That's why Connecticut's called the Constitution State. One of the plaques, and interrupt me at any time, but one of the plaques they have in England, it says Thomas Hooker, this is where he lived, and he's the founder of the state of Connecticut, father of American democracy. Another plaque, it says the Hinckley district there in England, it says Thomas Hooker, Puritan clergyman, reputed father of American democracy. Actually, Hartford, Connecticut has a statue of Thomas Hooker at their old state capitol grounds. He's holding a Bible. At the base of the statue, it says, leading his people through the wilderness, he founded Hartford. On this site, he preached the sermon, which inspired the fundamental orders. And anyway, and then lots of plaques in Hartford. One of the plaques said, the people can join ourselves to be as one public state or commonwealth. That's what the fundamental orders. So again, the people, which is the church, conjoins itself into a public state. So again, you have a church group forming itself into a public state. And then it goes on to preserve the liberty and purity of the gospel of our Lord Jesus, which we now profess. So they picked the form of government that would preserve the gospel. Run out of time. So this is the first step. So in New England, instead of separation of church and state, it was the pastors and their churches that created the state. How could you say, pastor, don't preach on politics when it's the pastor's sermon? That's their constitution. How could you say church members don't get involved in politics when all there was in Hartford was the church members? There were like no non-church members to be lazy and let them take over. They had one building called the meeting house. That's where the pastor would teach the Bible, and that's where they would do their city business. The word synagogue means meeting house. That's where the rabbi would teach the law, and that's where they would do their city business. I mean, why build a separate building just to talk about a different topic? You go to old downtown Boston, you'll see the Old South Meeting House. That's where they preached the Bible. That's where they did the city business. The word politics comes from the Greek word polis, which means city. Indianapolis, Minneapolis, politics comes from polis, which means city. So politics is the business of the city. So when the revolution starts, the British sent over military governor Thomas Gage, who outlaws meeting houses. We don't need the people meeting. Democracy is too prevalent in America. You just do what the government mandates. And so this is the first wave Calvinist Puritans. They're really into a plan. But then the 1700s, you have the Lutheran pietists, and their attitude was, no, it's more than a plan. You have to have an experience with Jesus. And when you do, your life will change. And the Moravian Lutherans influenced the Wesleys, who influenced George Whitefield, preached this great revival. And they're focusing on a personal experience with Jesus. It's more than just a plan, but it's so personal that you're not going to be involved in worldly things like bars, brothels, lewd theater, and get involved in government. And so that's the origin of this idea that it's more holy not to be involved. Martin Luther had a personal revelation that just shall live by faith, very personal to him. But some German princes want to break from Rome, and they say, kingdom of mine, you're all now Lutheran. And the people say, okay, well, what do we believe? So for these people in these kingdoms, it's not the same personal experience Martin Luther had. And so a revival movement starts called pietism, saying being a Christian is more than a state doctrine, more than a plan. You have to have an experience with Jesus. And when you do, your life will change and you won't do worldly things, including worldly government. And so 4 centuries of this allowed Hitler to seize power. And they're putting Jews on train cars, carting them away to their death, and they're going by churches crying out. And the church response was, well, that's the kingdom of the world. We're the kingdom of the church. The two don't touch. And so we can't do anything about it. That's the government. So let's just sing more praise songs to Jesus, right? And anyway, excuse me a second.
Hallelujah.
Man.
Alarm on my phone.
Let me stop right there, because we're going to have to edit that out anyway.
No, it's fine.
Well-
it sounded like you made a point and everybody started cheering. I was like,
I
wow,
see.
he's got his own
It was a Tim
soundtrack.
Walker Smith song.
I didn't know we had a whole audience there. When you're just to summarize the journey here, we have the Calvinist, Lutheran, Puritans who are talking.
No, Calvinist Lutherans are on one side, the Lutheran pietists on another side.
And the Lutheran pietists. Okay. So the Lutheran pietists start talking about this. This is when we get the idea of the personal experience with God, which I came into in the Jesus movement. So I came in the 1970s, and it was all about, I grew up in religion, but now once I came into this movement, I had an encounter with Jesus, and it was like, wow, my kingdom is not of this world. And so I grew up in all the liberties and freedoms that Christians labored to give me in a nation where I could freely follow Jesus and hear the gospel in a street corner. And I could care less about government, politics, worldly affairs. I just want to be a purist. I want to leave everything and just follow Jesus and preach the gospel. So I actually became like one of those pietists. I separated myself from everything in culture to just follow Jesus, and then gradually came around to the realization that, like with 7 mountains, that God is the God of the whole system, and we're called to disciple nations. You can't disciple a nation you're not engaged with. Oh, wait a second. Christianity is relevant to all these other areas. I mean, does that fit what you just described in terms of where people are at, like me?
Yeah, exactly. And so there is a middle of the road, and it is Christianity is a personal experience with Jesus, right? Very, very personal. Thank God for that. But we also want to be involved because we want our kids to have a personal experience with Jesus, right? So if you really believe the gospel, so the most important thing is to preach the gospel. But the second most important thing is to preserve the freedom to do the most important thing. I mean, if you really believe the gospel is the answer, you're going to be involved wanting to preserve the freedom to preach it. If Sharia law Islam takes over, you can't preach it. If North Korean communism takes over, you can't preach it, right? Areas of India, the radical Hindus, or communist countries, or as in Houston, the first open lesbian mayor of Houston. She subpoenaed all the sermons, text messages, and emails of all the pastors. He's just going to comb through them to throw the book at him. And so they finally rallied and got rid of her. But she wanted to limit. I mean, if that behavior is not sin, arguably there are no sins. And if there's no sins, you don't need a savior. And so the answer that I have to those that think it's spiritual not to be involved is, what do you do with Numbers chapter 30? It's the silence equals consent chapter. A half a dozen scenarios, one being, if a daughter is still living in her father's house, binds herself with a vow. In the day the father hears it, if he's silent, her vows stand. If he disallows it, she's released from the vow. That's come down to us as vows in a wedding ceremony. And the pastor tells the church members, if you're silent, you're giving consent to the wedding. It's called the rule of tacit admission, T-A-C-I-T, and it's in common law, Black's Law Dictionary, an admission reasonably inferable from a party's failure to act or speak, right? So silence equals consent. And so if a church member's silence gives consent to weddings, their silence gives consent to other things. If they know they're killing babies and their silence, they're giving consent to that. If they know they're teaching something to kids in schools that Jesus would not teach, right? So Jesus, it's interesting, their tactic is to guilt trip Christians into being more Christian than Christ. You say, what? Yeah, if you're really Christian, you'll be tolerant. You'll be silent while they teach this LGBT transgender agenda. Question, would Jesus teach that? Jesus said in the beginning, God made them male and female. So you're telling me if I'm really Christian, I'll be silent and let them teach something that Jesus would never teach. So if I'm really Christian, I won't act like Christ. Yet Jesus said, if you're silent and you allow one of these little ones that believes me to stumble, it's better that a millstone be put around your neck and you be thrown in the depths of the sea. So all these people that think they're being more spiritual by not getting involved are, by their silence, giving consent to sin. They're inviting the judgment of God upon their heads.
Wow. Man, we're gonna be talking some more with you, Bill Federer. How do people follow you and get in touch with you and keep up with what you're doing right now?
Oh, thanks, Lance. My website's AmericanMinute.com. AmericanMinute.com. And one of the books that highlights this is called Who is the King in America?
What's the name of it again?
It's called Who is the King in America?
Who is the King in America? What's the subtitle?
The subtitle is, and who are the counselors to the king? So in a nutshell, the people are the king, right? And in 1965, 93% of Americans identified themselves as Christian, but it's gone down. Today, it's only 65%, but that's still a majority. And so if 65% majority of the people identify as Christian, that makes the pastors counselors to the king. And you have two types of counselors. One tells the king to go to sleep, and the other throws ice water on his congregation and says, wake up. You don't just have the right to vote in America. You're going to be held accountable to God for what happens in America.
Amen.
You're going to be held accountable to what happens in America. I would love to get your thoughts. We only have a minute, 30 seconds left. Mercedes, I want to hold him over for one more segment, but you have any thoughts, any questions, anything you want to say?
No, I just think that this is a rousing call to action, that go and vote. That I know we've got a lot of people listening to us. I mean, the stats on Christians who aren't voting, who are registered and aren't voting, are staggering. I think it's something like 40% who are registered and then they don't vote. And it's because this lie that the devil tells people that, just separate yourself, that's worldly. But I hope that you've been listening to what Bill's been saying, because he's built a case for you that says not only should you be engaged, you have a biblical mandate to be engaged.
Well, he's pushing it even a little further. He's saying there's sins of omission and sins of commission.
Yeah.
And by you omitting and not engaging in your authority to do right, you are doing wrong. And it's actually participating in a sin. And you've helped empower the devil over other people and yourself. You've given tacit agreement to the devil.
So I would say go, we just had John on for a couple of episodes, John Graves. Go to millionvoices.org, download your voter registration guide, and please, please, please go and vote.
And one more time, Bill, how can they track with you? Give us your email or your website.
Oh, thank you. It's AmericanMinute.com.
AmericanMinute.com. We're going to be having you back in the future, and we'll be back again with another episode. Don't miss it.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends, because the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to navigate the world.
Did you guys know that my buddy Mike Lindell did his QVC commercial, the biggest recorded commercial in their history? He couldn't get the commercial right doing the script. They tried for 5 hours. He said, just let me do it my way. He did it his way. It was an instant success. But the problem they had was that little piece of jewelry right there was the cross. They told him he had to get rid of the cross. He refused to do it. My friends, I believe that's part of the secret of this man's success. He's never been ashamed of Jesus. He's not hiding his Christianity behind his back. He's bringing it out to the forefront. And by the way, I want to say this, mypillow.com, if you go there and you check out the slippers, this is the one product. He's making his money off the pillow. I told him I'm going to make the slipper famous. This imitation fur interior, this suede-ish outside, this strong bottom. You can wear these indoor and outdoors. You can get a high back, a low back. Get the slippers. It's like slipping your foot into a piece of heaven. mypillow.com, promo code Lance.